So in the past few days, we've received a ton of new information regarding Fernando Alonso's 2019 Indy 500 attempt. And in this video, we're going to look at all the information and break it down for you. So what are we going to be talking about? Well, we're going to be talking about Fernando Alonso's new number and potential livery design. I'll show you one later on in this video. We're also going to be talking some sponsors that have been announced for the McLaren Indy organization. And we're also going to be talking about some teammate potentials, whether or not Fernando Alonso will have a teammate at McLaren for this year's Indianapolis 500. And finally, exactly which team will be forming a technical alliance with McLaren Racing for this year's Indianapolis 500. The answer will probably surprise you. So let's get into it. And we had a bit of a leak regarding Fernando Alonso's Indy 500 attempt on the IndyCar store, of all things. We had a keyring as well as a kind of novelty garage sign appear on that store for sale, showing very clearly that not only will Fernando Alonso, that's not much of a surprise, but he will be back in blue and orange. The McLaren orange will return. But the surprising thing, and the thing that caught a lot of people off guard, was it showed the car number, and the car number will be number 66. Now, many people were able to guess, or maybe some people weren't educated exactly what the 66 means to McLaren. Well, car number 66 was the number of the first McLaren chassis to win the Indianapolis 500. Ironically, it wasn't the McLaren factory team that scored McLaren its first win. It was actually Mark Donohue driving for Penske. And here's the other kind of interesting fact about that, was that it was Penske's first win at the Indianapolis 500. So clearly, McLaren going for some good voodoo. I actually thought that the numbers were going to be 74 and 76. Essentially the same ideas McLaren ended up having, but 74 and 76 were the two races in which Johnny Rutherford won for the McLaren factory team, meaning the orange and blue car, which of course Fernando Alonso will be driving. But doing a tribute to Mark Donohue and that first McLaren car to go into victory lane is certainly a smart one, and it's certainly one that hopefully will bring them some good omens for the Indianapolis 500. Now, another thing that we need to think about, and numbers aren't that important, let's just keep that in mind. I don't want to be like the guy who, maybe a DW type, who's like, well, Chase Elliott in the 9 is just the biggest thing ever. It's not really. The 66 was used last year by J.R. Hildebrand. He, of course, raced for Dreyer and Reinbold, and it was actually for a while connected to a second McLaren entry. That seems to be going away a little bit. I would expect him back at Dreyer and Reinbold Racing, but I guess he's not going to have the 66. He chose the 66 not because of Mark Donohue, but he chose it because of Jim Hall. Of course, Jim Hall has actually got a little bit of a space in this particular video. That's ironic because I just moved that car into frame today. But, of course, Jim Hall, for most of his chaparrals that he designed, he put the number 66 on there. We're getting off topic, though. Let's talk a little bit more about McLaren. So a couple of sponsors were announced by the McLaren Indy Twitter. This was not a leak. This was an official announcement, and the first sponsor is ScanSource. It's a tech product and solutions company, and that's fairly general and not very detailed, but I can give you some information about this company. They have connections to Zach Brown, and they have connections to McLaren, and they have connections and a vested interest in Fernando Alonso's globe-trotting adventures as he kind of tries to become the greatest driver in the world. How do I know this? Well, I had a model car arrive on my doorstep a couple of days ago, and it just so happened to be the Rolex 24 Ligier that Fernando Alonso, along with Zach Brown of United Autosports and Lando Norris, who of course is a McLaren driver in F1 this year, raced in that race. Of course, Zach Brown was the car owner. He didn't actually drive. But if you take a look on the big honkin' fin back there, and hopefully it will come into focus at some point, you will see that there's a big old ScanSource logo back there. Come on, focus. There we go. Yep. ScanSource. So they have, as far as a year back, have been associated with Zach Brown and Fernando Alonso. So you would imagine that probably it'll be kind of similar placement on the car to this. It's not going to be a primary sponsor. In fact, I don't think they have or will announce a primary sponsor if they even have one in the pipeline for quite some time. That'll be a major announcement. They'll probably go all out on social media if they have that. But there was another sponsor that was announced, and it was a fairly major one, especially in IndyCar circles. And the second sponsor that was announced by the McLaren Indy Twitter was AutoNation, specifically AutoNation Chevrolet. Now, AutoNation was on Fernando Alonso's car in 2017 at the Indianapolis 500, but that was a deal through Andretti. AutoNation now, believe it or not, is spread across 3 different teams in IndyCar and sponsors no less than 4 drivers. Of course, they are the primary sponsor of Jack Harvey. They also sponsor, as an associate, Ryan Hunter-Reay and Marco Andretti. And now adding Fernando Alonso and McLaren to the mix gives them a pretty wide swath of the IndyCar grid. Not much else I have to say about AutoNation. I think it will probably be a much bigger part on the car, a bigger logo on the car. It doesn't appear to be a primary sponsor. I do also find it interesting that they tied the engine manufacturer of this McLaren effort. Of course, what will be powering Fernando Alonso will be a Chevy engine, so they kind of did the business-to-business thing and are going to try to sell some Chevys through AutoNation alongside Fernando's Chevrolet power plant in the back of his car. And I just think AutoNation is great for IndyCar racing. Clearly, they have a major commitment to the sport, even though they just recently changed CEOs, which makes me a little bit nervous because a lot of times when you have those CEO changes, a lot of times they'll look at racing budgets and go, nope, bye-bye. But we'll have to wait and see. I think they're going to get some ROI, especially from Fernando Alonso. And as the leaked merchandise would indicate, the IndyCar will probably look very similar to what the Formula One car does. I've made up this artist's, and I use that in big time quotation marks, rendition of what I think the McLaren IndyCar effort will look like. Of course, this is pending primary sponsorship or other entities coming into the fold, or maybe McLaren absolutely dropping a bomb on us and saying, psych, it's green now. you never know. But this is kind of what I think it's going to look like, and I think I'm going to get pretty close in that estimation. And finally, and this may be some of the most significant news in terms of what to expect performance-wise from the McLaren effort. Jim Aiello of the Indianapolis Star reported about a week and a half ago that McLaren will partner with Carlin Racing as a technical alliance for this year's Indianapolis 500. Now, Carlin Racing is in their second full-time season of IndyCar racing, but obviously, especially a lot of you European viewers will know Carlin as a major force in the junior series of open-wheel racing. They've been able to develop a lot of drivers, including the driver who we've talked about earlier in this video, who's not named Fernando Alonso, Lando Norris, who has gotten all the way to McLaren in Formula One. Now, there are some things about this partnership that are good, and there are some things that are going to make Fernando Alonso struggle. Number one, Carlin Racing is not nearly on the level that Michael Andretti's team is. It's not Andretti Autosport, and it's not even Ed Carpenter Racing, which was rumored for a very long time as being a potential spot where McLaren could partner with a team. Of course, their engine choice made them very limited in what teams they could partner with. Obviously, Penske's probably not going to share his secrets. AJ Foyt probably doesn't give much of a crap. So really, it came down to Carlin or it came down to Ed Carpenter Racing. Now, personally, I think Ed Carpenter Racing would have been the much better choice because, quite frankly, Ed Carpenter Racing had all 3 of their cars in the Fast 9, and the highest qualifying Carlin car last year was Charlie Kimball. I think he qualified somewhere like 12th position, which is still the 4th row of the grid at Indianapolis. It was very respectable for a new team with not a lot of data, but this is the problem we come to. There's not going to be a lot of data. Now, Carlin Racing is more or less expected to have 3 cars on their own, coming out of their own stable, those being Charlie Kimball, Max Chilton, and yet to be confirmed, but pretty much confirmed because it's pretty clear that he has money and is going to run the majority of the season in car number 23, R.C. Anderson. So you've got a rookie, a driver and 2 drivers who have experience and have pretty good experience, specifically leading the race, particularly in Fernando Alonso's Indy 500 in 2017 with Kimball and Chilton. And it's worth noting that both cars qualified relatively safe in last year's Indianapolis 500. Neither car was in any kind of fear of getting bumped. And remember, at Indianapolis, you have to qualify for the race. There are more cars than there are starting positions, and there are no starting positions that are locked in. Carlin has at least proven that they can get cars into the show, so that's not a problem. But I do question what the data is going to, or what kind of data flow Alonso's going to get from a Max Chilton versus what he was able to get in 2017 with a Ryan Hunter-Reay or an Alexander Rossi or even a Marco Andretti, who a lot of people credit as being pretty good with setup, especially on oval tracks. So you had all these guys who could bounce all this information off of, and now he's heading into this year. He's got a rookie that he'll have to deal with, and then two drivers who, again, just aren't quite there. They're not, unless Carlin absolutely hits a home run setup, and that's certainly a possibility, and certainly McLaren. In fact, in a lot of ways, Carlin may be the beneficiary of this technical alliance a little bit more than McLaren. They're going to have all those brains at McLaren, and certainly the racing brain of Fernando Alonso to come in there and say, well, this is the way I like the car set up. Let's see if it goes faster. Now, this could turn out to be a disaster, too, because if Carlin completely misses the plot, I don't know if Fernando Alonso, well, this is probably putting not enough faith in Fernando Alonso, but if Fernando Alonso has to rely on his own instincts, and quite frankly, he doesn't have a whole lot of oval experience, so if he has to set that car up by himself, or if he has to go his own way, if his style doesn't mesh with Kimball or Chilton, the experienced drivers on that team, he's going to have to do his own thing. So that's something that I think we will have to file away for later and kind of bring it back up in the month of May to see what happens. Is this combination one that is potentially race winning this year? We'll have to wait and see. You certainly have to think that McLaren is sparing no expense to do this. Otherwise, why would you pay Fernando Alonso to come out and race with you? But at the same time, it's going to be an uphill struggle this year. 17, in a lot of ways, was kind of shooting fish in a barrel for Fernando. He had the best car. He had the strongest engine, even though it did end up blowing up, and that ended up being the Achilles heel, because there's almost no doubt in my mind that if he had been able to run the last 20 laps of the race, he probably would have been at the front. Of course, you also have to consider that the aerodynamic package is significantly different for this year than it was in 2017. Significantly less downforce, a lot more push in the corners when you get behind other cars. Now, IndyCar is trying to change a little bit of that, but it's definitely going to be a different style of race. Passing is still, in my opinion, going to be at a premium. Fernando's not going to be able to slice through the field like he did last year, or 2 years ago, I should say. So that's going to be something to consider. Qualifying is going to be very important, and as we saw, Carlin appears to be a team that will qualify about mid-pack. Again, could be completely wrong on this, and that's what the comment section is for. What do you think about Fernando Alonso and the details that have come out about his team for 2019? Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more IndyCar and motorsport content, and we'll see you in the next video.